John 8:32 says, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Welcome to this Wisdom for Living discussion led by pastor, teacher, and counselor Al Rosenblum. For access to Al's other studies, to request an appointment for a personal discussion, or to contact our team, go to www.alrosenblum.com.
Prepare yourself for Bible study. And Father, we're grateful for your grace and mercy. I thank you so much for my loved ones, and I pray for them. I pray for my family. I pray for my daughter, Gracie, who's about to have a baby. Pray that you keep her healthy and the baby healthy, and that they'd come out just strong and ready to go. I pray for the inner peace in their lives, and I thank you for all of our students here, all who've come to hear, and I pray that you'd use what we're doing to help more people. I pray, Father, that these videos that we're making will be sent around and be understandable. Help me to be simpler, say things in a simple way so that the average person can hear it. So we ask these things in your Son's name. Amen. All right, we're going to get to King Saul, and we're going to talk about how he got trapped in some really bad old man patterns. And if he were to live today, we would say that he was definitely mentally ill. And so we're going to kind of delve into him a little bit. And before we do, we're trying to warm up to him with some understanding psychological, biblical concepts. So the health of any person begins with the first few years of life. And, people poo-poo the first few years of life. And, a lot of times biblical psychologists will say, it's not about the self. It's just about what you do, that God didn't call us to love ourselves. He called us to obey his word. And understand what people are saying in that regard, that even adult people need to obey God's word, whether they feel like it or whether that is their inner world or not. But what God wants is for our inner world, our desires, our beliefs, our thoughts, our feelings, our words and actions, to be cohesive, to be lined up with him. He doesn't want us to be conflicted and controlled by old man thinking, by beliefs from the world, our heart and soul attached to the world, and yet trying to obey his word through human energy, human ability. One of the greatest things I ever learned was from Bob Thiem, and that is that the Christian life is a supernatural life. It's not just a life of learning ideas and doing certain things. It's a supernatural way of life empowered by God himself. And so this life is this supernatural life. The core of it is the inner life of the believer. To get the inner life of the believer into a healthy place so that what comes out of you, out of me as a believer, it is something valuable, something worthy of the Lord, something in keeping with the thoughts of Christ. So, and that's a genuine thing. I'm convinced that part of the credibility gap in the church, especially in the West, by that I mean Europe and America, is that we are one way inside, and yet we try to hold to a form on the outside. And Paul talked about this in 2 Timothy, holding to a form of godliness, but denying the power. We have a form of godliness where we try to be nice and sweet and kind with our personality, and yet our commitments, our deep down core commitments, are still to self, to worldly things, to the human agenda. So we're going to talk about how to get healthy. First, we got to talk about how people get unhealthy. the health of any person really begins the first few years of life, especially how they interact with their mother. The mother's the person that nurtures. The mother's the first connection. And in the first 3 years of life, it's primarily the mother. Now, we have 3 grandchildren. Well, sorry, we have 2, almost 3. And the interactions so far, they're all under just barely, one of them's barely over 2, and the other one's not even a year. And listen, it's just mothers. Mother and grandmother are the ones that are holding and burping and have the patience to do all that, and to be delighted when they poot and go, oh, and so the guys are standing around going, I can't wait till he can throw a baseball, that kind of stuff. But the first few years are important. If the mother is unhealthy and angry, she's unhealthy by being angry and demanding of her child. The child will think, I have to be perfect. If she's needy and smothering, the child will either join and become needy with her, join to her, and not ever break away, which is how you create narcissism. Or the child will become what's called codependent and try to nurture the mother. The mother leans on the child rather than the child being nurtured by the mother. If the mother is filled with shame about herself, about her life, about her failures, then she will shame her child, finger wagging. So some counselors that I have encountered are, instead of being counselors who listen and try to really understand what's going on, they hear enough to become their moralizers, their finger waggers. You should be doing this differently. You're disobeying God. You're not doing the right thing. As if wagging their finger and moralizing somehow helps a believer get more aligned in their desires with God. The key to the Christian life is to want the will of God instead of the human will or human agenda. That's the key. So if you have an unhealthy mother, unhealthy father, it puts a lot of pressure on the child that the child cannot handle. So as goes the family, so goes the nation. And so we have unhealthy people getting married and having unhealthy marriages, producing unhealthy children, who then in turn do the same, produce an unhealthy marriage, unhealthy children, and on it goes. And it doesn't just stay, it gets worse and worse. That's what's happening in the Bible as we get to Saul. We've come through the period of the judges. It's chaos. The whole nation's in chaos. Now, an unhealthy, highly conflictual or violent marriage produces a stressful, negative environment for children. They can't properly handle that. They're not able to handle it. So they form compensatory strategies. They compensate. Children will adapt to their parents' marital stress or the stress of a parent who's angry or fearful or guilt and shamed, whatever, perfectionist. The children will adapt. But what they do, the way they adapt, is they change their view of reality. The reality in which they live is not healthy for them. It's not serving their needs. And so they alter their view of what's actually going on so that they can pretend that it is, because they're driven to get their needs met. They come out of the womb as needy as any creature in the universe, and they are required, it is required of parents, of mothers especially at first, to look in their eyes and show that they are delighted with them, and for this baby to feel loved and wanted and talked with and interacted with and all kinds of things that a mother does to make a child healthy. If she's depressed, one of my teachers in my master's, psychology master, said the worst thing that can happen to a child is a depressed mother. So the mother doesn't have the inner strength, the inner enthusiasm to give to the child, and ends up depending on the child instead of giving to the child. And this is what happens in a lot of cases. You have a spectrum from a mild form, like ADD is we talked about, comes from zoning out, all the way to the end of mental illness, psychopathy, or psychopaths. So we talked last time about how everybody, we start disconnected from God. We develop all of this self-centered thinking, the old man beliefs that about the human agenda. I'm going to get what I need from the world. I'm going to get what I need from human relationships. I'm going to get what I need from people. And so we attach to all that and we ingrain all that. And that's the way that our brain, we form our brain around that, and we form neural pathways that control the way that we think and feel. So we basically program ourselves with worldly thinking. Okay. Now, when this is the case, and that worldly thinking begins to produce chaos, like during the period of the judges, especially with the tribe of Benjamin, and we'll talk about it a little bit, then the children that come out of that, they're weak. All right. They're conflicted. They're compensating. They've developed defense mechanisms as kids. And this is going to be Saul. And you're going to see it in the cycles that Saul goes through, where he just idealizes David, thinks he's the greatest thing ever, and then devalues him, and then has to destroy him. It's just a cycle that you go through when you're in this type of mental illness. Now, we talked about a society that rejects grace, etc. I wanted to read Colossians 3:21. Fathers, do not provoke to harass or embitter. It means to discipline with anger, so that you anger your children, that they may not be discouraged. And this word athumos means to be numb or without passion. You can break a child's spirit with your anger and hurt them. So those trapped in patterns involving poor image of self. And I said that we alter this image when you're a little child and things aren't good in your home. Your parents are fighting, or worse. Your mother is distracted, or worse. You're not getting what you need, and maybe they're leaning on you, or maybe they're trying to stay together just because of you, and somehow you know that, and so you feel responsible for the whole thing, keeping your parents together. I've taught with kids or young people that, if not for me, my parents would have split up, and they were just so burdened, and there's excessive burden a child is not designed to carry. But we get trapped in these patterns. I want to describe one. And there are stages of these patterns. One is called idealization, where we try to connect with someone, and we do what's called love bombing. When I was back in the dating scene, someone would come along and just want to give you everything. Just they thought you're the greatest thing ever. Well, they had put you up on a pedestal. They had idealized you. Had I fallen for that, this idealization, they call it love bombing, just to make this intimate connection. And the theory is they're trying to reconnect with you the way they connected with their mother. Well, and then once their connection is made, and you do anything that disappoints, then there's a devaluing. It's what we used to call iconoclastic arrogance, where you make somebody into an idol, and as soon as you see their flaws, you have to destroy them. And that's what this cycle is. It's exactly what it is. It's a idealizing, blowing them up to be much better than they really are. And then you end up having to destroy them. And this is what Saul does with David. Exactly what he does. So there's an idealization, a devaluing, a blaming, because it always creates conflict. You're in a relationship with someone that's doing this, that's in this cycle, and they're loving you, and then they're down on you, and then they're blaming you for all of it. They can't ever accept any blame for themselves. You make a mistake, you get angry or whatever, and boy, you are the worst. It's all about you and your mistake. Their part of it can't even be discussed. Don't even bring that up. And then they must destroy you or discard you. They may try to pick you back up, and this cycle goes on and on. This is a lot of people's relationships with their parents or with a spouse. So this is this cluster B cycle that we talked about. Now, you don't have to have a mental illness to be in the cycle. You can have a very mild form of this, where you're always trying to put somebody, your partner, up on a pedestal. You're always wanting them to be better than they are so that you can idealize them. The knight in shining armor, or the princess sleeping or whatever. And once they show that they're just a real person, a sinner saved by grace, struggling to grow, then that's not good enough. Then you lose you lose this idealization. And not only are they they're not just a normal person, there's something wrong with them. They're terrible. And so you have to blame them for it. I can't believe what you did. I can't believe it. And then they must destroy you, or they must destroy your character. They must destroy your reputation. They'll tell everyone what a bad person you are, true or not. And so this is the cycle. We're going to see this with Saul, who was totally focused on gaining and keeping the approval of the people and the soldiers. When he met David, he loved him, and he love-bombed him by bringing him to the court. He ate at the king's table. He had David play music for him. When David began to come into his own, he was a great military guy, and the people loved him. I mean, listen, Saul should have been grateful. Saul should have been applauding him louder than anybody. Saul was the one that brought him and put him up in this spot. Instead, because he wasn't still Saul's little idealized puppet, Saul had to destroy him. He tries to kill him. When David came into his own, the people gave him great love and praise. Rather than celebrate with him, Saul flipped and hated him. He spent many years trying to kill David in spite of David's assurances that he fully supported him. Even when David could have killed Saul, like in the cave, and Saul could see the evidence that David was not his enemy, the delusional view in Saul's mind couldn't reboot to see the truth. He was stuck as a victim with David as the evil perpetrator. And it simply was not true. He made it up in his mind. Now, let me give you a personal example. My father's family were very legalistic Arminian types. In other words, they believed you could lose your salvation. All about the finger wagging and the moralizing. They attended a branch of the Church of God, not the charismatic type, but just the legalistic type. My aunt, my father's little sister, there was my father, another brother, and her. She was born in the early 30s and became pregnant, unmarried, as a teenager. The man that she was pregnant by refused to marry her. Boy, this was uncool in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Very uncool. And especially in this legalistic church. They hauled her in front of the church and shamed her in front of the whole church. I don't know if my grandparents were involved in that or not, but this destroyed her. It literally destroyed her. It was traumatic. She ended up having another illegitimate child with the same man. She eventually married another man, a very harsh and abusive man, with whom she had two more children. Now, by the time I came along, she was already in her mid-30s, and I never really noticed her. That, you're a little kid, you don't notice, but as I became a teenager and adult, I realized something was different about her, and it was shame. Her face showed the shame that she had experienced as a teenager, the rejection of her parents and the condemnation of her church. And whether she thought she could ever go to heaven or not, I'm not sure. But her face was guilt, was shame. Well, this is great trauma. The shame she felt from the mistakes and judgment heaped upon her was etched into her face. She couldn't look people in the eye. Her two older kids, who were the illegitimate kids, my cousins, were clearly trauma bonded with her. The trauma of this whole thing had caused her to latch onto them, protect them, and probably resent them because of what they had brought to her life. So, especially the older one. Both of these kids ended up doing the same thing that she had done. They had multiple kids out of wedlock. The younger boy, who was my age, adopted this air of superiority, this puffed up characterization of himself, a sense of self-importance. It's like he walked around thinking that he was something that he wasn't. And listen, this is a compensation for the guilt and shame that he felt. He felt worthless, so he presented himself as full of worth. So his stepfather resented him. He walked around like he was, Billy Bad, and he was obnoxious and difficult. His stepfather resented him and growled at him every day, and the boy formed this narcissistic, delusional bubble where he pretended to be important and superior. He thought he was going to be a great country singer, be at the Grand Ole Opry, and he just had all these delusions, and yet he was making the same mistakes that his mother had made, just mistake after mistake. He got involved in all kinds of drugs and different things. And finally, somebody that he was dealing with shot him in the head and killed him. He was probably in his 30s when that happened. Terrible story. Listen, but it's what trauma, guilt, shame, and religion does to people. It's a great example. Now, all of these people are dead. I wouldn't be telling the story if they weren't. Or most of them, maybe not all of them. And if you're listening to this and you're one of the people involved in this, please don't feel judged or criticized. But I want to show you another trauma bond and what it does to people with Joseph, Jacob, and Benjamin. Benjamin is born into Rachel's death. All right, the greatest sorrow of Jacob's life up to that point. He's going to get a greater sorrow when Joseph dies, but out of this trauma that he's going through, Jacob, or as the Hebrews call him, I heard a Hebrew guy talking about that. They call him Jacob. So Jacob, he's going to bond with Joseph and Benjamin. Now, in Genesis 35, 16 through 19, they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was still some distance to go, Rachel began to give birth, and she suffered severe labor. And of course, they didn't have hospitals. They had midwives, and who knows what was going on. And it came about when she was in severe labor that the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for now you have another son." And it came about as her soul was departing, for she died, that she named him Ben-Ani, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is to Bethlehem. They're on the way to Bethlehem, and Rachel dies giving birth to Benjamin. Now, you know, Jacob or Jacob is just beside himself with grief. This was the love of his life. He loved Rachel above all other things in this world. Now, he tells Joseph in Genesis 48:7, he says, retelling the story, as for me, when I came from Padan, which is where Laban was, or Laban, Rachel died to my sorrow in the land of Canaan on the journey, where there's still some distance to go, and I buried her there on the way. Now, after Rachel died, Jacob becomes obsessively dependent on Joseph and Benjamin. You know the story. He played them, they were the favorites. I mean, he made Joseph the head over all of his older brothers. He kept Joseph right by his side. He got him the coat of many colors, all of that business, and the boys really resented that. You know, it appears they started off with a good relationship with their father, even though they came out of Leah in the servants. But he really favored Rachel and Joseph and Benjamin, and it ended up creating great resentment. They wanted to kill Joseph. They wanted to kill him. Instead, like good Jewish boys, they decided to make a profit. And I can say that because I'm Jewish, but have Jewish blood anyway. Now, when talking about Benjamin, what happened to Benjamin? Now, we don't know who mothered Benjamin, but whatever happened is that Benjamin, through this trauma bond with Jacob, this connection that wouldn't let go, Jacob babied him and protected him, and you know, he wouldn't let insects nick, you know, he just kept everything away from him so that he wouldn't die or get hurt, because that would have broken his heart even more. That's what these trauma bonds do. So Benjamin didn't get to develop naturally. He didn't have the challenges that the other boys did. He wasn't allowed to go out there and you know, pit himself against the animals. Jacob couldn't handle it. So he kept him close and he kept him safe. Poor little Benjamin. Well, Benjamin becomes a wolf. He becomes a angry young man. When talking about this later in Genesis 49:27, it said, Jacob says, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. These are prophecies. In the morning, he devours the prey, and in the evening, he divides the spoil. Now, the Benjamites became the most warlike of all the Israelites. They were angry. They were resentful. They were great warriors. They could fight with both hands. They were so, you know, they could shoot the bow with both hands. And they were also degenerate as well. If you know the story of the man who brought his wife or concubine, and a bunch of Benjamites grabbed her, or they gave her, they wanted to have at it with the man, and he gave her the wife, and they killed her by raping her all night, and she died on the doorstep. He cuts her into 12 pieces and sends her all over to Israel, and then there's going to be war against the Benjamites. Well, the warlike nature of the small tribe of Benjamin became well known. It was exhibited in their swordsmanship, and you can read this in Judges 20:15-16. Their tendency towards sexual depravity, and their rebellion in their ungodly defense of their extreme wickedness in Gibeah. That's the Judges thing I'm talking about. Almost wiped out the entire tribe. And the Benjamin men ended up without wives. So they went to one of the festivals where young girls, single young girls, would dance out in the woods, one of the Jewish festivals. And these, I think it was like 600 Benjamin men that didn't have wives. The wives had been killed. They went and stole these little girls and made them into wives. So listen, the Benjamites weren't really nice people, not as a rule. And this is where Saul comes from. Now, the the time of the judges, if you've read anything about it, there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. That's 3 times that's stated in the book of Judges. And the point is that there was no authority structure, and there was just chaos. People did whatever they wanted to do. And that's kind of where we are in America right now. We've been doing this since the 60s. The 60s came along, and everything, all the basic institutions and guidelines and, moral structures that were really good, that kept people safe, that kept things sane, all of that went out the window. And now, 60 years later, we're really paying the price for it. The fruit of all of that has finally come due, and we're seeing all of that now. The women's movement. Listen, the birth control pill gave women freedom to have sex like men, and they went for it, a lot of them. And so a lot of young women just decided to become indiscriminate like men and sleep with whoever they could. Of course, this has just destroyed the family, completely destroyed the family. And so now we have a lot of people that are coming out of these families that are not mentally right, that have come out of these stressful marriages and stressful families, this chaotic situation. Where I live in a very rural area, the rural people, they're crazy here. It's very chaotic. I mean, they're all divorced. They're all intermarried. They're all it's just chaotic. And that is all a result of the loss of Christian morals, the loss of Christian institutions, the use of drugs as a replacement, the indiscriminate choices about sexuality that have produced children that people weren't ready to have, and they got married and they couldn't handle their marriages and they fell apart. And some of these kids that are getting saved and we're dealing with at our church have been out on their own since they were 10 years old, finding different ways to live with an aunt or a neighbor or somebody. God always provides a way, but it's chaos. And this is what we find when Saul comes on the scene. It's chaos. This is where he grew up, how he grew up, and the evidence, starting with 1 Samuel, like chapter 9, indicates that he had some kind of strange relationship with his father. So let's look at some principles. First of all, he grew up in a time of great social upheaval, the time of the judges, where there was no authority in Israel and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And that's Judges 21-25. So we have broken families create broken, insecure children. Saul was hungry for approval. For whatever reason, he did not get what he needed as a young person, because it shows up in his adult life, an incredible need for admiration, for approval. And this is the indication of narcissistic tendencies, a hunger for approval, the willingness to do a lot of things. Somebody who is willing to call attention to themselves, either in an appropriate way or inappropriate way, just to get attention, just to get approval. Okay. So this is Saul. And we'll look at the different ways that I think I've got it here today, where God told him what to do. Samuel told him what to do. But when he thought he was losing the loyalty or approval of the people, especially the soldiers, he would jump in there and do things he shouldn't do, like make sacrifices that he wasn't authorized to make. So he appears from chapter 9 and 10 of 1 Samuel to have had an unhealthy bond with his father. Now, listen, Saul is 30 years old. He's a grown man. God has chosen him to be king of Israel. He is at a place in his life where he is ready, according to God and Samuel, to be appointed the king of Israel. and he is running around afraid of disappointing his father. It's all over chapter 9 and 10. He is seen, we were introduced to Saul, and as he is with a servant, searching for donkeys that had run off, his father's donkeys. Now, some say this is a metaphor for Israel and his rule over Israel, that Israel was like a donkey that Saul tried to rule. And some others say that David was like a shepherd and Israel like the sheep. So who knows? Interesting metaphors, though. Now, all the way through chapter 9 and 10, Saul is constantly concerned about finding the lost donkeys and what his father might be thinking about him. He says several times, we got to be careful, because if we're gone too long, Dad's going to stop thinking about the donkeys and wonders what's happened to us. Apparently, Dad keeps a close watch on this 30-year-old man who's ready to be king of Israel, but Dad is still running his life. It's kind of interesting that he hasn't been able to break free to stand on his own, from his father. So a 30-year-old man about to be made king, and he's terrified of disappointing his father. That's a clue. It's a clue with what comes later, with this cycle that we discussed about idealizing and then devaluing and then destroying. This is the cycle that Saul's needing to break loose of his father, and he never has been able to do that. So the compulsion for the person caught in this smothering attachment with a parent, the cycle is to attach and create that same kind of attachment so that you can break free of it, because the goal is to break free. And he can't do it with his father, and so he has to do it with other people. And he tries to do it with David. Now, there's possible evidence of the trauma bond with his father that we'll see play out in his relationship with David. See, you got to understand, you got to try to understand Saul. I mean, when you look at Saul and the way he behaved, you go, what is his problem? What was the problem? Well, maybe this is it, maybe not. I mean, regardless, the principles are true about these cycles. They're pretty much clearly seen. Trauma bonds keep young adults from separating and individuating and becoming their own person and developing an authentic sense of self. Listen, the sense of self, I'm beginning to realize more and more in this early part of your life, yourself and your awareness of yourself and your attitude and view of yourself really is so important. If you don't have a healthy mother and a healthy father to bolster and invest in you, in your sense of self, they keep you tied to, yourself is tied to mother. She won't let you go. She's feeding off of you. Then you don't, at a critical point, you don't get to individuate and have a sense of self. You don't get a sense of self. Your self is tied to mother. And what some people do is they create a false self, an alternate self, a mythical self, and they create this image. They project an image of themselves. Their real self is hiding. Their real self feels ashamed because it can't stand up. It can't break free and be an individual. That's healthy. I'm still individuating myself from that old man system where I was tied to it and compulsively pursuing earthly, worldly things year after year after year, breaking free of that to stand free within myself before God so I can purposely choose God. The Christian life is intentional. It's not compulsive. Compulsive behavior is just knee-jerk, reactionary behavior. You can't really control it. You're not in charge. You just automatically do it. That's compulsive. That's old man baggage. That's old man beliefs. Christianity is when you've broken free from that compulsive behavior and you're standing free and you choose God. I choose you. I choose God. I choose to stand with God. I choose to attach to God. So breaking free from parents, from families, from systems, from the old man system is critical, and you must have a sense of self to be able to do it. Those who grow up and they say they lose themselves, I don't believe that. They say the self dies. I don't believe that. I believe there's a self, hidden or not. But this is all, quote, psychological, but it's not. Now, trauma bonds keep young adults from separating from parents, individuating, becoming their own person, developing their authentic sense of self. They stay connected to a parent to service the soothing of the parent's trauma. That's what Jacob used Benjamin for. He wouldn't let him go. I got to have you near me, son. You're the answer to my grief. I lost your mama, and so I'm not losing you. And that was so bad for Benjamin, bad for everybody. This is what happens. And so Benjamin becomes unhealthy. You know, God had to get Joseph out of there before Jacob turned him into a basket case himself. So the parent sees the child still connected, using the child to service their need, so that even as a married adult with children, this same person remains tied to the parent. Years down the line, the parent's old and aged, and they're still got this grip on their kid. The kid's 50 years old, got his own family, and the parent still got this grip. You know, gotta have you. Boom. You know, jump and run. Never break free. And so I'm of the opinion that the Lord can always heal anything, anybody, even these types of things that happened very early, so early that it became part of your personality. So this person remains tied. They don't actually develop properly. They compulsively seek approval from this parent and from anybody who will momentarily fill the emptiness with even temporary admiration. And we're going to see this is Saul. Saul is so hungry for approval and admiration and approbation. He's just so hungry for it. And he's never had a chance to be on his own and stand on his own. When he has his first chance to stand on his own and be appointed king, he hides in the baggage. He hides. Now, here we are with that. When Samuel assembles the leaders to make Saul king, Saul is so insecure he hides among the suitcases. I mean, apparently these people brought their donkeys laden with baggages. They're going to stay for a week, whatever. So they brought tents or whatever they brought. And so there's an area where they've tied up the mules or tied up the donkeys or the horses and, all the baggage is there. Well, Saul's over there hiding. He can't bring himself to step up front. So chapter 10, verse 20 through 23. Thus Samuel brought all the tribes of Israel near, and the tribe of Benjamin was taken by lot. Then he brought out the tribe of Benjamin nearby its families. The Matrite family was taken, and Saul, the son of Kish, was taken. But when they looked for him, he could not be found. Therefore they inquired of the Lord, Is he gotten here yet? The Lord said, Behold, he's hiding himself in the baggage. Now, I don't know how they had this thing with the Lord going, but Samuel must have had this close thing with the Lord to get stuff like that. So they ran and they took him and they stood him among the people. He was taller than any of them. He was a head taller than anybody in Israel. Saul was so hungry for their approval, but he was terrified that he wouldn't measure up. He's the biggest man there, and yet he's terrified that he's not good enough. Here's your indication that he's just now. Look, people are introverts. I'm an introvert. I don't like crowds. I don't like to be around a lot of people. I prefer to be with one or two people, having a quiet conversation and discussion. I'm not a loud, boisterous people. And in fact, I don't like to be in that environment with loud people laughing loud. And I mean, it hurts my ears. And anyway, I'm just a joy to be around, I promise you. But Saul, he's a scaredy cat. I mean, he is hungry and he's terrified. One of the primary characteristics of these cluster B people we're talking about is an inordinate hunger for admiration. So if there's someone in your life that's always doing something outwardly for other people, either showing out, doing something wrong, or they have this perfect doing something right, scenario, then, and they are constantly like addicted to doing that outwardly, that's a good indication that you're dealing with somebody in these types of patterns. Now, I'm not saying you got somebody that's mentally ill or has a narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis. Not at all. Don't even go there. Don't even go there. You're not qualified to give a diagnosis. I'm barely qualified, and I have a degree in it. I just don't use diagnosis in the work that I do. I don't need it. It's just because God works with everything, anything along the spectrum, from Jesus is the perfect healthy person all the way to psychopaths, which is the most unhealthy person. Anywhere on that spectrum, God can work with it. Now, fourthly, and one of his first important opportunities to trust and obey the Lord, Saul allows his fear of losing the approval of the people to motivate him to disobey the Lord. So I want you to understand that he's been given clear orders and commands. Samuel's made this very clear. And when the pressure comes, which it always does, and it looks like he's going to lose the approval, the attention of the people, he is willing to jump in there and do whatever it takes to hang on to them, to hang on to their approval. So Saul tells him in chapter 10, verse 8, 1 Samuel, go down before me to Gilgal, and behold, I will come down to you to offer burnt offerings and sacrifice and peace offerings. You shall wait 7 days until I come to you. Pretty clear. It's going to be 7 days. Samuel's got the gift of prophecy. He knows what's going to happen. He's looking ahead at what God has told him. In 7 days, I'm going to show up and we'll do the sacrifice and peace offerings. I will come down to you and I will do the burnt offerings. So now, 3 chapters later, he's in Gilgal and they've assembled the army. They're going to do some fighting. Saul waited 7 days according to the appointed time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal within the time period. And the people were beginning to scatter from him. Listen, I think it was the Philistines that were coming upon them, and the people were getting nervous, and they were spreading out, and they were kind of hiding in the rocks and getting ready to fight. And Saul looks out and sees the people, the army, beginning to separate out, to scatter. And so Saul said, bring me the burnt offering and the peace offering. And he offered the burnt offering. It came about as soon as he finished offering the burnt offering that, behold, Samuel shows up. Saul comes out to meet him and greet him. He said, but Samuel says, what in the world have you done? What have you done? Saul says, because I saw the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the appointed days, that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, and therefore I said to himself, inner dialogue, this is the key to everything. Are you aware and alert to what you're saying to yourself? He said, I said to myself, now the Philistines will come against me at Gilgal, and I have not asked the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, you have acted foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God. You have not done what God said. He said, for now, The Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. And this is going to be the beginning of a lot of trouble. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him as ruler over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. He's already anointed David at this point, or he's about to. Now, Saul was empty inside and was seeking to fill the void within himself with the approval and admiration of the people. This is what he was going to be, the hero. He was going to pull it all together. The people were going to look to him. He was going to be admired. He was going to gain their approval. I'm the hero. This was his fantasy. All he had to do was trust the Lord, trust his messenger Samuel, and wait for the Lord to take action. Listen, this can be one of the most difficult things in your life if you're struggling with these kinds of issues, is to let God let things play out, to not react. This has been the biggest type failures in my life, is reacting to things that were in opposite, what I considered in opposition to me. They really weren't, because God was in control, trying to control them, trying to change them, trying to do things that I thought were right and necessary, but really weren't. That I should have just let it all play itself out and let people make mistakes, let people fail, not harmfully, but I should have. Looking back, I look at those situations and they've become a sore spot in my life where I have stumbled around and I've stumbled over the wrong things and failed to be able to pick myself up properly. And so this is where Saul is. Saul has made a huge mistake because he won't let life play itself out according to God's plan. Let God be in charge. Just quit trying to fix everything. Quit trying to change everything. Quit trying to change people. So when he thought he might lose the attention and approval of the people, he acted compulsively. Again, compulsively is that like you can't help yourself. You just do it. And why did I do that? Well, you just do it. That's compulsive. This is old man behavior patterns ingrained. This is your hunger and thirst attached to things in the world in a very unhealthy way, so that you have these compulsive patterns of behavior. You should look for those. Listen, you have them. Don't think you don't have that type of thing. You do, unless you're just way down the line, where you just compulsively think things. You find yourself thinking the same thing over and over and over again. You're in a conflict with someone and you grind it, you imagine it over and over and over again, and you talk about it and you tell your story and you say what you got, you do it over and over and over. It's compulsive. You want to break that. You want to get free of that. You can't serve the Lord while you're trapped in that. You got to get out of that. And this study is about helping us see. I'm Saul. I've been Saul in my life. Maybe I'm not so much at this point, but I've been Saul, just trapped in compulsive behavior, doing the same thing again and again, not even realizing it, not even seeing it. So look for your own behavior that you just knee-jerk do. Boom, there it is. Why did I do that? I don't know why. Well, you need to stop. You need to look at yourself. You need to listen to your inner dialogue. Recreate that in your mind and go, what was I telling myself that caused me to think and feel that thing and then act that way? What was it? And the more you look at it, the more you'll be able to see it. And the more you can dig down in that and go, what is it that I want that I'm not getting that's caused this compulsive reactionary pattern? You pull that thing, keep pulling at that and pulling that, pull that thing apart. You'll be able to get rid of it. You'll be free of it. In that part of your heart, you'll be able to stand free and choose the Lord. Now, compulsive behavior, that's what I'm talking about. Thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that take over your soul and body that you can't control, that are so habituated, they're always an indication of old man beliefs and often indicating addictive type behavior. Saul was addicted to approval. He was addicted to the approval of the people. And he wanted it bad. All right. Once again, Saul exposes his compulsive need for public approval from the soldiers giving in to their desires. Listen to this is 2 chapters later. 1 Samuel 15, 1 through 3. Then Samuel said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you as king over his people, over Israel. Now, therefore, listen to the words of the Lord. Thus said the Lord of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he set himself up against Israel on the way while coming to Egypt, from Egypt." This is about when they were coming into the land. The people of Amalek tried to fight with him. Now go and strike Amalek, and listen, here's the command. Utterly destroy all that he has. Do not spare him, the king Amalek, but put him to death, both man, woman, child, infant, ox, sheep, camel, donkey, dog, cat, and parakeet. Everything. Now you go, why would God do that? It's a cleansing. It's a spiritual image of cleansing of evil, because all of these people were steeped in evil, idolatry, evil. God said we gotta cleanse the land. That's what they were supposed to do when they went into the land, but they didn't do it. They made all these treaties and they compromised and did all this stuff. They were supposed to go in and cleanse the land of all the evil people, but they didn't do it. That's like people who won't deal with their own man baggage. They won't do it. They've got all kind of enemies in the land of their own heart, their own mind. They just let them lay there. They just let them be there. They just keep on with the compulsive behavior because they've managed to get themselves into some kind of moral pathway here where they do the right thing as a rule, no matter their motive. But now, so they go and they capture Agag, the king, and utterly destroyed all the people. But Saul and the people spared Agag, the king. They spared the best of the sheep, the best of the oxen, the best of the fatlings, the best of the lambs, and all the good stuff. They were not willing to destroy them utterly as God had commanded. But everything that was worthless and not any good, they destroyed it. But they kept the good stuff. Why should we get rid of the good stuff? Now, Samuel comes and said, Saul runs out, "Blessed are you of the Lord. I have carried out the command of the Lord." Samuel said, "Then what is this bleating of the sheep in my ears?" He hears all these sheep. "And the lowing of oxen I hear." And Saul said, "The soldiers have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and oxen." Why did they spare them against the command of God? Oh, we were going to sacrifice them to the Lord your God, but the rest we've utterly destroyed. Again, Saul is so fixated on keeping the approval of the people that he once again disobeys the Lord. He gives in. Whatever the people want, he will do it. He has to have their approval. He's addicted to it. He lives on it. He can't stand. He can't go against them. Maybe there's somebody like that in your life. I mean, maybe it's the public. Maybe it's a person that you are, you just can't. You have to have their approval. You can't stand them to suffer. So you're constantly trying to rescue them. Their life is a mess, and they need to suffer. But you can't allow it because you can't stand for them to suffer. That's a mother and a child that a mother won't let a child grow up and face their own choices and face the consequences of their own choices. So mother comes in and rescues. That's what Jacob did with Benjamin. Doesn't matter. He would not let him face any challenges in life. He kept him safe. So because that was it, he was dear to Jacob. I've got to have you, Benjamin. I can't afford to lose you. I've lost your mother. Then he lost Joseph. I cannot lose you, Benjamin. You're everything to me now. That's terrible. Listen, that's terrible abuse on a child. No child can handle that kind of stuff. All right. Saul constructed an imaginary self that required the approval. This is an imaginary self that he presented to the world for approval, because that was his hunger, approval of people. All right, Father, thank you so much for these concepts. I pray that we can see these things in our life. I pray that we can see them in the lives of our loved ones. For those that we see if we see beyond ourselves into the lives of somebody with these patterns, give us grace. Give us grace, Father. Don't give us finger wagging morality. It's not our place to try to fix somebody else. It's not our place to condemn other people. It's our place to pray and to give grace and to give forgiveness. We love you, Lord, and we pray all these things in Christ's name. Amen.